I'd like to welcome Sister Masuma. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. How about yourself?
Alhamdulillah, good, thank you. So we have a general question this morning to inform you, and then inshallah you can share your wisdom. Dear Masuma, I've been married for 10 years. Me and my husband are both religious. However, lately my husband has been neglecting his salah. He seems to be having a crisis of faith at the moment, and I'm finding it difficult to cope with. I'm finding myself less attracted to him, and the more he neglects his religion. I'm more concerned that I'm not doing my religious duty. Please advise, and many thanks.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. There's a few things that I think we need to sort of look at. The fact that she says her husband is neglecting his salah. Now, generally, I think if the foundation isn't there, if the understanding of the salah is not there, if we're doing it because we feel that we're doing God a favour, then the minute something goes wrong in our life, the first thing that will go is the salah, because I feel like, well, God's not giving me what I want, so why should I give him what he wants?
Yes, yeah.
So I think it's really important to, I'm not saying that this is the case,
yeah, but it's something
but
that
it's something that I think we need to think about, especially when it comes to our children as well. You know, to make sure that they understand that the salah is something that they need rather than something that Allah needs. They're doing it for their own benefit, and I think that's really, really important to understand. Also to ensure that I have a connection with Allah. So I'm talking to Allah outside the salah. The salah is a formal way of talking to Allah, which I've been told to do. But if I have a relationship with Allah where I talk to him outside the salah, then I will not abandon the salah, because I have that connection throughout the day.
Yeah.
You know, Allah should be your best friend, your counselor, the person, you know, the entity that you turn to whenever something good happens in your life, something sad happens in your life. You know, he's the first entity that you tell. And then if you feel the need to tell others, you can. But usually when you've told Allah, you know, you feel like you've offloaded and you don't need to then. So if you've got that relationship with Allah, then I think salah just continues.
Sure.
And it's much more easier than to connect in the salah, because you've connected to Allah throughout the day. So I think those things are really, really important. I'm not saying that that is the case in this person's life at all, but I'm saying I think that's some things that we should consider.
So what would you say to the wife?
She says she feels less attracted to him because he's neglecting his religion. That's a good thing and a bad thing.
Sure.
Because it's a good thing that her likes and dislikes are according to Allah. Yeah. So it's good that, you know, she feels that sort of annoyance or upsetness that, you know, he's not connecting to Allah. Or he's not praying his salah. But at the same time, it's a bad thing that she's judging another human being. And I think it's about trying to get him to realize the importance of the salah, trying to get him to
being more of a help to him and finding a solution
rather than judging him, because the minute you judge someone, they switch off.
Yeah, and that could be her tomorrow, and it could be from the past, could be the future, that she has that tumble in sort of, you know, faith crisis that she's said her husband. So she'd equally want him to support her, not judge her.
And the fact that, you know, God has paired you up with someone who will help you on your journey. So realizing that there's growth, you know, she's been paired up with him for a reason.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's important also not to just sit back and think it's okay. So make him realize what he's doing is wrong, but come from a place of love rather than from a place of judgmentalship, sort of thing.
Condemn the poor man.
I think a lot of the times our ego comes into play. Yeah. And when your ego comes into play, then again, the other person doesn't listen. Yeah. If I'm coming from a place of love, then it's more likely
it's compassion as well, isn't it? That, you know, show that empathy. Like I said, if it's an understanding that, you know, we could all be in that position, so not to be so haughty and think, well, I don't like you now, because I mean, obviously, it's not a desirable.
But it's, at the same time, you don't. You know, it's true. We shouldn't be comfortable with people who don't pray, but you know, again, she's there to help him. He's not doing it openly. No. I would hope he's not sort of sitting there saying, you know, I'm not praying and I can't be bothered with it. And, you know, sort of telling everyone. Yeah. It's between a husband and wife, and I think that's important.
And that's perfectly goes on to my point of saying that, you know, where do you draw the lines of a, you know, spouse relationship? That, you know, do you have that right to be there, sort of, you know, witnessing, judging, condemning, and giving the the fatwa to your spouse, or to actually understand this is where relationships are kind of getting a bit different nowadays, where we think that there's an ownership, possession, that you should be what I want you to be, but actually, like you said, the ego, that the end goal is Allah, and you've got to help that person, just like you'd expect Allah to always be there and guide you, and maybe you're that source that can guide,
chosen to guide him. No, for sure. And I think that's really, really important to realise that you're there to help him, and you role model it.
Yeah.
So even if he's not praying, you make sure that you pray. You get up at Salat. I mean, a lot of wives will. It's not so much that he's not praying, but he won't pray when it's Fazila time.
Yeah.
It's fine. That's his journey.
Yeah.
That shouldn't stop you. So you go ahead and pray, and you role model it to him, and hopefully he'll come on board.
Yeah.
And again, I think, a lot of people will ask, well, how do you know if it's the ego that's come into play, or am I doing it correctly? If you're doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and you're doing it from a place of love, then the result is it doesn't bother you. The result's not on you. The result's from God.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're doing whatever you can, because that's what you're meant to do, to help this person. And then whatever they decide to do with what you've given them, that's their journey, and that's between them and God.
And Allah guides. He says in the Quran, doesn't he, that I guide.
Yeah.
So it's not, she could be a form of help, but ultimately it's going to come from Allah, and inshallah, somebody improves. But in terms of the role of the wife, but how much do you sort of, in a relationship, guide each other, and or do you sort of go parallel, thinking this is my journey, this is your journey? Do you cross over and say, right, together what's the best way?
I think the most perfect marriage would be when you journey together and you help each other. But it's very rarely that you have the most perfect marriage.
Yeah. Sometimes a spouse can actually be a test, can't they? So,
and I think generally, you have to realise that they're an adult, and they're on a journey, and on the Day of Judgment, they're going to be standing in front of God by themselves, and you're going to be standing in front of God by yourself, and you're on your own journey. And, you have to make sure that you can stand in front of God and say, I tried whatever I could to guide the spouse that you gave me. Whether they took on the guidance or not, that's their journey. Yeah. But I did whatever I could. And when you're doing it like that, then you're going to do it, one, for the pleasure of Allah, and you're going to do it the way He wants you to. So your ego's not going to come into play. You're not going to sit there and belittle the person and judge the person and make them feel like they're useless because they're not doing what you're doing, or you're not going to think you're better than them.
Yeah.
So when it's done from that perspective, then I think it's much more powerful. I think it's difficult when you're with a spouse and you have expectations from them, and when you're not getting those expectations met, then your ego comes into play, and then that frustration and that anger comes into play, and then you blame them for your not being as religious as you should be. And again, you shouldn't rely on someone else for your religiosity. It should be you and your relationship with Allah.
Yeah, but it's it's going back to the point where you say about at the end you're standing in front of Allah on Day of Judgment as your own self, but and the Munajat of Imam Ali, where they say he says that, and it's obviously from Quran, that the husband and the wife will be running away, and in that hour that and inshallah we
children who we sort of spend all our lives taking care of, and everyone, we'll just drop them.
And I think it's in those examples, it's more of the people that don't support each other to do the goodness in life. And perhaps if somebody was in a relationship with one spouse and there's manipulation there's evil intent, and then the reality there's not going to be hidden in that world, is it? So it's going to be you're running away from your own deeds. It's not that Allah's going to unjustly treat anybody. So and you'll see the reality of even your spouse. How do you know what could be better than you could be? We don't know.
We don't.
And we don't even know the closest.
But I think also at the same time, you've got that extreme where you're sitting there judging them and thinking you're better than them. But then you've got the other extreme where you feel like, okay, it's his journey, so his problem, I don't have to worry about it. No, again, you can't be that. No. There has to be a middle ground where you're helping them, you're doing that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, but at the same time it's doing it with a pure niyyah, rather than doing it from a perspective of I need to show him. Yeah,
and actually that goes with any family member. I mean, you mentioned about children, but with all your goodwill, you could raise them in the best environment, and they decide, actually, no, I'm going to go with what I want to be. And
it's easier with children because you still have a right over them as a parent.
But what if
So
they
it's
become
like
adults and they
even
turn...
as adults, I think if you've brought them up with understanding the status of a parent, then you can still sit there and say to them, you know, this is what I'm telling you.
But this is Islamic perspective. But when they're raised in the West, and you know, they can call childlike from the age of 6, and they come home and say, "You hit me," and I'm calling childlike. They have this element of, you know, self. You know, well, what do I want to do? And again, if you know, and it happens in this day and age where children are becoming, you know, new generation, yes, some are becoming very religious, but some are becoming less religious. But even at that point, what do you do as a parent? You don't own your child.
No, I agree, but I think again, it's from a perspective of, I don't think we're teaching them correctly. I don't think it's the fault of the child when they're young. I think it's the fault of the parents and the society and you know, all of us as adults. We're not teaching our children correctly if they don't understand the status that God is. I constantly used to tell my children, I don't have to be an amazing mother.
Yeah.
I don't have to earn your respect. God's given that to me. You don't have a choice. You have to respect me. And, you know, if we can teach our children that, then they will, you know, you'll always have that sort of hold over them where, you know, when you tell them something, they will listen. And especially when you're telling them that it's coming from God rather than you. And again, it's not bringing it back to me. It's like when I tell my children something, God says this.
Yeah.
How can you then sit there and say no? But that has to be taught from a very early age, and it has to be role modeled. A lot of the times we want our children to learn these things, but we ourselves don't follow it.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think you know, in an ideal world, that's how it works. I think seeing so many examples nowadays, I think, you know, with all the goodwill parents have, it doesn't always necessarily work out that way. And you know, it's shocking sometimes. You think that, you know, with what's getting taught in schools these days, and there's so much exterior influence on your child's life. It's not just the parent. And yes, absolutely, Allah gives that right.
Has a huge,
and it's so difficult. And I think, inshallah, that Allah, you know, whether it's a spouse, I think sometimes the lesson is to detach yourself from even the people that you love, because it's, again, turning back to Allah and not thinking that everyone is going to be there in the way that you want them to be, whether it's your spouse or, you know, whoever that...
I think that's a beautiful point, you know, to actually detach yourself, but then love them as an extension of the love of Allah. So you're not loving them separately. No. You love them because that's what God's told you to do. Yeah. And then I think it plays out much better because all your loves are as an extension of your love for Allah.
And you have no expectations, like, you know. It's a selfless love, isn't it? And again, Ahl Bayt have taught us that beautifully. So inshallah, that's what the lesson of this sister will be, that she has that selfless, unconditional love and helps with that guidance. That she can
just role models it, and inshallah then he'll take that on.
Thank you so much. Inshallah we'll see you again. And next up are Mini Hussainis.